Good afternoon. I call this hearing to order. A quorum is present, and without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Before we proceed, I'd like to go over some items for our remote hearing. First, if you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so these issues can be resolved immediately. Members participating remotely must continue to remain visible on camera for the duration of their participation in the hearing, unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. It is committee policy that members participating remotely will remain muted when not recognized, just like turning your microphone on and off during an in-person hearing. This is out of courtesy to all members on the committee so that background noise does not interfere with another member who is recognized to speak. When you are recognized, you will need to unmute your microphone and pause for 2 to 3 seconds before speaking so that your words are captured on the live stream. If you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the document to veteransaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. It will be uploaded to the committee document repository. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning witnesses today. This will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Does any member have a question about procedures for this hearing? Seeing none and hearing none, we will proceed. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today, I'm pleased to hold this full committee hearing entitled Investing in a Better VA, Examining the Role of Infrastructure in Veterans' Access to Care and Benefits. This hearing is an opportunity to not only discuss the Biden administration's $18 billion proposal to enhance VA's physical infrastructure, but to also think outside the proverbial brick and mortar box and consider how human capital and systems of support all work together to make veterans' access to care and services that much stronger. This conversation is particularly timely for 2 distinct reasons. First, the Biden administration is set to release its fiscal year 22 budget request for VA tomorrow, which I hope the administration uses as an opportunity to address the chronic underfunding of VA's capital asset portfolio that has persisted for decades. And second, the president is about to nominate 9 commissioners to the Asset Infrastructure Review, or AIR Commission, which will make recommendations regarding the modernization or realignment of VHA facilities. My Republican colleagues regularly argue VA's budget has soared to new heights in recent years, noting both mandatory and discretionary outlays have nearly tripled during this time, while the number of veterans using VA benefits and services have increased only modestly. And while these 2 points of view are factually accurate, they lack important context. This view fails to take into account that veterans using the system are utilizing it for more of their care, not only because VA's care is more culturally competent than care found in the private sector, but because it is part of the pact this nation makes with those who choose and those who are asked to wear the uniform. Today's VA is serving a veteran population that has survived more catastrophic injuries than their predecessors, with more chronic conditions, comorbidities, and long-term care needs than ever before. However, when you look at the specific funding levels for construction at VA, the same cannot be said. In fact, from fiscal year 2016 to fiscal year 2021, the compound annual growth rate for major construction was negative 6.8%, while the minor construction program had a negative compounded growth rate of 1.66%. And non-recurring maintenance had a negative compounded growth rate of 0.78%. Now, VA's ability to deliver timely, high-quality care is directly tied to the quality and quantity of its capital assets. At present, VA is sitting on $23 billion worth of facility condition deficiencies across its portfolio alone. That is the maintenance backlog. This figure has doubled in 10 years. Clearly, VA's non-recurring maintenance budget is insufficient. Congress and many others bear the blame for this funding gap. Now, we should ask ourselves, how much care has been sent out to the community because physical plant space at facilities is subpar or doesn't reflect best practices in 21st century healthcare delivery? Now, my colleagues across the aisle will likely argue today that potentially spending $18 billion on VA's infrastructure is premature because it, quote, fails to consider existing reform efforts already underway, unquote, alluding to the Air Commission. They will argue we should wait for the Commission's findings. Given the severity of underfunding as it relates to VA's capital assets, we cannot afford to wait until the Air Commission provides recommendations to Congress and the White House. Like safety and seismic issues across the portfolio must be addressed now. Life safety and seismic issues across the portfolio must be addressed now. Regular maintenance should not be delayed because of budgetary concerns, nor should we delay retrofitting facilities to meet the needs of VA's fastest growing population, women veterans, or delay addressing the lessons learned from this nation's first pandemic in more than 100 years. If we're going to build back veterans' trust in VA, we have to start making serious investments in the outdated infrastructure meant to serve them. And nearly 3/4 of Americans agree. Aside from robust physical infrastructure, equally important is the workforce VA needs to deliver healthcare and benefits to veterans. Human capital is a very critical part of the infrastructure at VA. VA can improve buildings or build new facilities, but if VA does not have the workforce to staff them, then it cannot deliver on our promise to veterans. Complex hiring authorities, non-competitive salaries, lengthy onboarding processes, and other administrative barriers impact VA's ability to meet staffing needs across all occupations. We also need to address a shortage of staff in areas such as information technology and infrastructure management to ensure that VA can keep pace with changing conditions and fund new resource needs. Further complicating this process is the general lack of healthcare providers. The nation's workforce pipeline is insufficient to meet the needs of an aging population. We need to be doing more to identify and cultivate a diverse, high-quality healthcare workforce. While these broader challenges may sit outside this committee's jurisdiction, we can encourage VA to engage in conversations with other relevant agencies to highlight VA's unique position as this nation's largest integrated healthcare system and how it might help address this issue. For example, in recent years, VA worked to expand its graduate medical school education program by nearly 1,500 slots. And based on conversations with Dr. Clancy, it sounds like VA has capacity to further expand its GME slots. Addressing infrastructure at VA requires a three-pronged approach in my view. I've mentioned physical infrastructure and the workforce, but I also want to ensure we include the systems of support that help ensure equitable access. And I would point to things like programs to adapt vehicles, tools to support telehealth, and efforts to improve accessibility so that veterans, no matter who they are, when they served, or where they live, are able to meaningfully access VA care and services. Through the investments in the American Jobs Plan, we can restore veterans' faith in VA by literally rebuilding the physical infrastructure of the VA system, investing in VA's workforce, and providing much-needed updates to the support structures that serve our veterans. This is just an initial investment, but with President Biden's plan as a framework, we can strengthen veterans' connection to the department while also building a stronger, more welcoming, and more effective VA. I look forward to hearing from my colleagues and our witnesses about how we can meet VA's infrastructure needs now and in the future. Ranking Member Bost, I now recognize you for 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, and welcome to our witnesses that are here today. We're here to discuss VA's infrastructure challenges. For our committee, this conversation is about more than just buildings and bridges. It is about how best to care for our veterans. Last year, 7.2 million veterans sought care through the VA. The VA healthcare system has a massive physical footprint across the country and in our territories. The average VA medical facility is 58 years old. This is decades older than medical facilities in the private sector. The age and condition of many of our VA hospitals and clinics do not support provisions of the highest quality modern medical care. That is unacceptable. Every member of this committee has heard about cramped exam rooms, waiting rooms, and collapsing roofs, bursting pipes, our defective heating and cooling system in VA medical centers. Despite record budget year after year, that has not changed. In 2015, the VA was facing a $51 billion capital need through 2015. Today, we're spending about $80 billion more on the VA overall and $2 billion more on maintenance than we did then. And in spite of that, the VA's capital needs have increased. They now total at least $62 billion over the next 10 years. Something is wrong. It takes VA a decade or more to build a new hospital. No medical center replacement has been completed since the Denver catastrophe. And there's only 3 of us on the committee that were actually around when we had to work on that problem. The next one under construction is in Louisville. It was originally proposed in 2004. VA bought the land in 2012. Ground has still not been broken. Leasing is not much better. VA typically pays developers to build clinics and lease them back. That takes at least 5 years. And without a doubt, veterans deserve better. In 2018, Congress passed the Asset and Infrastructure Review Act, which the chairman mentioned, the AIRS Act. AIR establishes an objective, data-driven process to realign and modernize the VA facilities and medical centers to better serve our veterans. The enhancement of the AIRS Act 3 years ago or the enactment of the AIRS Act 3 years ago was a massive bipartisan success. Many of the AIR Act deadlines will occur in the next 2 years. For example, VA will publish the criteria that will be used to recommend facility changes next week. We have to fix the deep problems with VA construction and leasing. That alone will take years. We should prioritize maintenance since every dollar spent to maintain infrastructure goes a long way when it's properly managed. If you repair a roof today, it could prevent a structure catastrophe or a collapse tomorrow. But any new efforts to fix VA's infrastructure issues must be in line with recommendations made by the AIRS Commission, full stop. In early April, President Biden proposed infrastructure packages. The White House has allocated $18 billion for VA within that $1.9 trillion proposal. How and where that money may be spent is very important. We still don't have the details. Weeks after it was announced, this administration continues to set a terrible precedent by going around the budget process, proposing mountains of taxpayer spending without a molehill's worth of jurisdiction. Congress has to stop signing blank checks. Let me say it again. Congress has to stop signing blank checks. It is the difference between throwing money at a problem and making a lasting impact for our veterans. Based on the American Rescue Plan experience, I'm skeptical, to say the least. VA still cannot tell us exactly how all the $17.1 billion will be spent. Speaker Pelosi once said, we have to pass the bill so that we can find out what is in it. That is no way to conduct the people's business. And it is in no way how we improve for caring for our nation's veterans. I am looking forward to hearing the testimony today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I will now call up and recognize our first witness panel. On our first panel today is Mr. Brett Sims, Executive Director, Office of Asset and Enterprise Management, U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr. Sims is accompanied by Mr. Paul Brubaker, Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Office of Information and Technology, and Ms. Jessica Bongiorni, Chief of the VHA Human Capital Management. Mr. Sims, I now recognize you for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman Picano, Ranking Member Bost, and members of the committee. I'm happy to be here today to discuss VA's infrastructure, human capital, and systems of support. I'm accompanied by Ms. Jessica Bongiorni, Chief of Human Capital Management, Veterans Health Administration, and Mr. Paul Brubaker, Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, Office of Information Technology. VA operates the largest integrated healthcare system in the nation, with more than 1,700 healthcare facilities, 158 national cemeteries, as well as a variety of benefit and service locations. However, our portfolio is aging, with the average age of VA's own buildings approaching 60 years old. VA's aging infrastructure is a barrier to the excellence in care and service delivery the veterans have earned. Healthcare innovation is occurring at an exponential pace. The comparatively newer private sector facilities are able to incorporate these trends, while VA's opportunities are limited within our existing facilities. To reverse the trends in VA's aging infrastructure, a large capital investment is needed. The President has called for $18 billion in the American Jobs Plan to modernize VA healthcare facilities. These proposed investments will pay long-term dividends by offsetting growing costs of older facilities while meeting the healthcare needs of today's veterans and those of the future. As a part of the $18 billion, $3 billion is sought to address immediate infrastructure needs. These immediate needs include upgrades to support the growing number of women veterans, improvements to utility and building systems for more reliable and energy-efficient operations, and enhancements to facilities to better accommodate aging veterans. The remaining $15 billion would be used to fully modernize or replace outdated medical centers with state-of-the-art facilities. This investment is multifaceted, reflecting the need to replace aging facilities, adopting modern trends in U.S. healthcare, and aligning with the future Asset and Infrastructure Review Commission decisions. The delivery of healthcare is constantly evolving, and so must the infrastructure that supports it. The department is making a strong commitment to ensuring that VA welcomes all of our veterans and that diversity, equity, and inclusion are woven into the fabric of the department. The transformation of VA healthcare to achieve a safer, more sustainable, veteran-centered healthcare environment requires that VA leverage innovations in ever-changing medical technology and clinical procedures. With these changes, there's less demand for large, sprawling campuses and more emphasis on ambulatory and virtual care. This evolving landscape requires that VA rebalance its infrastructure to provide for a blend of these delivery methods. The American Jobs Plan funding will allow VA to jumpstart a recapitalization effort, serving as a down payment on our path to modernizing our facilities. This investment will allow VA to address the degrading age and condition of our assets that present challenges to delivering world-class care. The American Jobs Plan, combined with a focus on public and private partnerships and a veteran-centered approach to healthcare delivery, will be transformative to the public health infrastructure of the nation. Veterans deserve a customer experience similar to services they encounter in the private sector. VA is working to integrate the virtual environment to ensure that the necessary tools and automation are available at the point of care, wherever that may be. We are focusing our IT investment strategy on jointness, ensuring we fully understand, prepare for, and adapt to any changes in the department's service delivery modalities or physical infrastructure. VA recognizes that investing in its workforce is key to delivering the best possible care to veterans. With more than 369,000 employees on board, including over 27,000 physicians and more than 94,000 registered nurses and licensed practical nurses, VHA is continuously recruiting new staff while investing in the development and retention of the current workforce. VHA has grown its workforce by approximately 2 to 4% each year for the past 5 years, including a 5-year growth rate of 11% for physicians and 20% for registered nurses. VHA staffing challenges mirror those of the private sector. There's a shortage of healthcare professionals in the United States, especially in rural areas and for scarce physician specialties. VA's technology workforce includes highly qualified cybersecurity professionals that are difficult to recruit and retain. To remain competitive in the healthcare and technology labor market, VA offers competitive total rewards packages. VA also invests in its employees through numerous development opportunities to ensure we're not only recruiting staff, but retaining them. To summarize, VA is using every available tool to ensure we are recruiting and retaining our workforce. We're leveraging the necessary technologies and skill sets to meet our veterans' 21st century digital service expectations. VA's strategic recapitalization undertaking, as part of the proposed American Jobs Plan, is a solid building block on which to develop and implement opportunities to best deliver healthcare and services to our veterans. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, and members of the committee, this concludes my statement. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My colleagues and I would be happy to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. I now will recognize myself for 5 minutes for questioning. My first question is for Ms. Bongiorni. Ms. Bongiorni, just bear with me for a moment. I'm trying to just get my screen to work here. Let me give Ms. Bongiorni, I'm proud to have championed a provision that was included in the Veterans Choice and Accountability Act of 2014 that directed VA to increase the number of graduate medical school education positions by 1,500 slots nationwide. It's my understanding that VA has already awarded 90% of these positions. What capacity does VA have to further expand its graduate medical school program?
Thank you, Chairman, for the question. And we are very appreciative of the opportunity received in the Choice Act that allowed us to expand by 1,500 GME slots. As you know, VA as a healthcare system is a vital training ground for America's clinicians, with over 70% of those physicians training at some point in their career in the VA. We do think that future expansion of GME slots at VA would be an overall net positive for the country, and we would be happy to follow up with the committee to provide additional information on how to approach that expansion.
Wonderful. I would appreciate your getting with my staff on that. Mr. Sims, as someone who spent the majority of his career at VA, I'm sure you're quite familiar with the Denver VA Medical Center project. Actually, the ranking member did bring that up in his remarks, and I was actually one of the members of the committee that was present when the Denver Medical Center project was underway. It took at least 14 years to complete. During that time, costs ballooned from an initial $328 million to $1.73 billion by the time the facility opened in 2018. Things were so out of control that in 2015, Congress transferred management of the project from VA to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Now, you indicated in your testimony that VA is making a number of changes now to how it executes its construction program. What assurances can you give to show that VA has learned from the Denver experience?
Thank you for the question, Chairman. I'll touch on a couple of things. First is we have already made significant changes. One of those is actually learning in the interaction we have with your U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that we've been in place for 5 years now. We've learned a lot on how they do business, how they do their projects, how they manage their projects. That has helped VA. We've been able to bring that in-house and update our processes. So there has been work already done, but we still have work to do. And part of that work is looking at how we actually structure our projects, starting from the requirement side of it, which is we want to design VA facilities that are much more structured and much more streamlined from the start. That comes with standardized design and adaptable space that can be used for different types of service delivery once it's constructed. Those standardized designs will allow us to reduce the risk both on VA and on our partners in industry who are delivering on these projects, because once they've started getting used to the VA standard design, it'll be repeatable. It'll be easier and quicker to deliver on those projects instead of starting from scratch on every project that we work on. And then once the facilities are constructed, that adaptable space can be used for multi-purposes. It can change modalities from virtual care to in-house care. If it's inpatient, it can be used for different functions and upgraded to ICUs quickly. Those types of benefits will help in the long run for the facilities that are constructed.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Sims. I noted in your written testimony, you indicated VA would use a data-driven process to determine where to invest AJP funds for recapitalization efforts. How long do you anticipate this process to take? And do you have the system in place needed to carry it out?
Thank you. That's a very important question that we're working on right now. So the short answer is we have the model, so the data-driven component of it working. We're working on fine-tuning what priorities we want to set within that model. And the outcome will essentially be a tiered structure of all of VA's facilities, all of VHA's facilities, I should say, and which ones are in that top tier and in need of investment. That process is in place, and we are close to being able to start working that list through leadership so that they can have their input into where investment seems the most appropriate.
All right. Well, Mr. Sims, we are a day away from receiving the Biden administration's fiscal year 22 budget request for VA. The FY21 budget noted that to fully implement the skip list for VHA would cost nearly $67 billion, not including IT infrastructure. Yet the FY21 budget requests only asked for roughly $3.4 billion for VHA, the bulk of which was for non-recurring maintenance. Unfortunately, asking for less than what is needed is a common theme that transcends administrations. What, if anything, can you preview for us regarding the President Biden's FY22 budget request for construction?
So what I would say is that we work closely with the administration on the American Jobs Plan, and the significant investment in VA facilities is important. I think we can all agree that our facilities need investment, and we are working to see what input we can get from Congress, both sides, bipartisan, on what the appropriate types of investment that the AJP would provide for VA.
Well, thank you for that, and I thank you for your brevity. I put you in a place where you had to answer going over time, but I appreciate that. Mr. Ranking Member Bost, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sims, in your testimony, you said the Biden infrastructure proposal would align with the AIR Act recommendations, and those recommendations, I'm talking about the AIR Act recommendations, won't be complete until 2023. How can this money possibly align with the recommendations that won't be around for another 2 years?
Thank you for that question, Ranking Member. That's a great question. We view these as parallel processes that support one another and ultimately are pointing toward the same outcome. So we're looking to get the right investment at the right locations to help enable that quality healthcare delivery at these sites. What we're looking at now first is of the $18 billion, the $3 billion is immediate term investments. So this is more like the example you gave of fixing the roofs, addressing some of the HVAC issues that we have in some of our facilities. So there's clearly an immediate investment necessary, and the $3 billion would go toward that. The $15 billion is directed a little more strategically at what we refer to as the recapitalization side. There are facilities, the majority of facilities in VA, 69%, that are older than 50 years, that clearly need investment. So I don't think the question is so much we don't need the investment, but what does that investment look like? We are allowing the Air Commission to direct the type of investment. What we're working on now are the sites. So where do we need the investment? And we have information we've learned from both our regular planning process as well as from the market assessments that have been ongoing for several years to know enough that there are sites that will continue to have a significant VA-owned footprint in order to deliver care. We can start work on those now. There are many examples of facilities that are landlocked, that are not available for expansion, that are at the age where further investment doesn't make sense. So we may have to look for additional development. That's the type of work that we would be looking to do now, and then allow the Air Commission recommendations to inform what we build on those sites.
Shifting gears in a different direction, VA construction and leasing for new facilities has been a serious problem. On the other hand, maintenance can be completed more quickly. wouldn't maintenance and be a better investment? And hold on here. Wouldn't maintenance be a better investment? And I think that's what you were just explaining, right?
It is. And the $3 billion is more toward that maintenance, non-recurring maintenance, minor construction, but smaller impact type projects. What I would say is that the examples that we're using here in terms of maintenance, they don't allow us to really get ahead of the curve and address the $22 billion maintenance issue that we really have until we get some of that recapitalization done.
So that really leads to the follow-up on that. And does the White House, with the White House infrastructure proposal devoted to so little maintenance, when we know there's so much out there, why would they do that and then come so high on the other side?
In general, because we're using the strategic dollars available in that $15 billion bucket to look at a recapitalization that to date has not really been available to us through the traditional budget process. Those are bigger, larger dollar projects where we still can use the traditional budget process to get to those smaller maintenance.
So do you know why it is that the administration is providing this additional infusion of cash through a supplemental rather than the VA's annual appropriation and process, which he's coming out with tomorrow?
That's a great question, and it comes down to focus. It allows that supplemental funding to be focused on areas like aging population and our CLC program, and areas like the women veteran and access to care. It allows us to direct funding specifically to those focus areas where the budget process is more geared toward physical infrastructure issues. The systems and the subsystems within the buildings are generally where that funding goes. So it allows us to be targeted and focused.
Okay, I'm going to try to get this last part of the question fairly quickly here with the 30 seconds I got left. The VA capital needs are over 10 years in the last 62 billion, and at least 62 billion. The biggest part of those is maintenance. Right? So where are we going to spend the 2 million more on maintenance than we have than we have 5 years ago? But the VA capital needs keep going up. Why are we doing that?
So we believe that we need to do both types of investments. We need to continue to do the maintenance, and the cost of that continues to increase in size and complexity the longer we defer. But we have to continue to do that because we cannot recapitalize every medical center in the near future. So it's dual path. We have to do both.
Thank you for your answers. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I now recognize the chair of our subcommittee on health, Representative Brownlee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Sims, and your team for being here. Mr. Sims, I have a question for you. And as I am sure you know, under current law, every major VA medical facility lease, which are leases that incur yearly rental costs of over $1 million, must be specifically authorized by Congress. In 2012, the Congressional Budget Office changed its method of scoring VA lease authorization legislation. Instead of scoring the annual cost of the lease, CBO scores reflect the cost for the duration of the lease, often 20 years or more. It's simple math. If, for instance, if a CBO now scores a 20-year lease, which costs $5 million a year, at $100 million in the first year. And obviously this has made it and continues to make it very, very difficult for the House and Senate VA committees to authorize new facility leases, and has led to a bizarre situation where Congress has appropriated funds for VA medical facilities, but the VA can't actually lease the facility. So earlier this year, I reintroduced a bill that I've introduced in my first year of Congress and every year since then. But it's my Build a Better VA Act, HR 913, which would modify the current process for approving VA medical facility leases by allowing major medical facility leases to be authorized by a committee resolution rather than legislation, which is the same process currently used for other agency leases that are executed by the General Services Administration. And I will just say that last month I spoke to Secretary McDonough about this issue, and he seemed to understand the issue and the problem. And so I'm just wondering, has the VA engaged with the White House on this issue? How can we gain VA support and support from the White House for including a fix? And, I think the whole committee has really concurs that the VA needs to be a more nimble operation as demographics move around. So leasing is a good answer to that, but it's only a good answer if we can actually lease the facilities when we need it. So if you could respond.
Thank you, Representative Brownlee. That's a great question. And I have been for a number of years involved with the challenges we've had in getting leases authorized. I can assure you we are acutely aware of some of the CBO scoring issues with getting authorizations passed. While I don't believe we have official views on the bill that you're referring to, I can say that we engage with the White House and OMB each year as part of the budget process when we're going to submit leases. So through the FY21 budget submission, we had 13 leases that were pending authorization. We had not received authorization for several years, so they just continue to stack up. We also, because we leverage the GSA authority for our leasing program, we have worked with GSA to better understand how they do leasing with their committees, as well as engaging with CBO to understand some of their scoring and rationale for it. We believe we're the only agency in federal government that has the requirement to have leases authorized via statute that gives CBO the ability to score those bills. GSA does not operate that way. They operate with the committee resolution that you referred to. So we're going through that process with these leases anyway. So we certainly are interested in continuing working with you on any way we can to get the leases authorized, both the leases that are pending as well as fixing the process for future leases that may come.
Well, thank you for that. And I think, the CBO and its scoring process, in some sense, it makes sense. We're committing to a long-term lease. We need to know the full cost of the project. But as you say, all I'm trying to do is change the way in which we do this. And certainly knowing the full cost is important, but I'm proposing that we change the process like GSA currently does, so that we have the nimbleness. So, I certainly would appreciate if you would take a look at my bill, and I understand that you're working with, both GSA and CBO on all of this, but I think, a more permanent fix is a much better way to go. So with that, my time is up, and I will yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee, and I certainly do hope we can get the challenge with the leases. You're not the only member, but you've been someone that's been championing this issue, and I really hope that we have an opportunity to get this done. I now call upon General Bergman for 5 minutes. General Bergman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thanks for everybody for being on the Zoom here. We're talking about time, we're talking about money, we're talking about support for veterans in many different ways. Brick and mortar needs to transition into facilities for veterans and all the services that go along with it. Mr. Sims, the Office of the Inspector General issued a report this week finding that the Veterans Health Administration underestimated the medical facilities costs to support the electronic health record modernization program by as much as $1 billion, and that these cost estimates have never been reported to Congress. When are we going to really know the true medical facilities costs for the EHRM program, and how are they going to be paid for?
Thank you for the question, Representative. What I will say is that VA concurred with the Inspector General findings in that report. There are several of those findings that go toward developing more robust life cycle cost estimates that VA did concur with and is moving forward on that. I'm not an expert in when the timing of those would be, so I could take that for the record to find out when some of those assessments would be completed to get an updated cost.
No, I appreciate that, because one of the things that's holding back our services to veterans, especially as they transition from DoD to the VA system, is the ability to transmit data, whether it be personnel record or whether it be electronic health records. And the point is, we're way behind. It's a lot of money to do that. We know that it's in the billions of dollars, but we need to tie down all the costs as sooner rather than later. Also, Mr. Sims, other major projects like supply chain and financial systems modernization are also creating medical facility cost requirements. It's kind of like going from legacy to next gen. Are these costs fully known and budgeted for? Do you think you have a handle on this transition, again, from legacy to next gen?
So I'll give a response on sort of the physical infrastructure and then ask Mr. Brubaker if he wants to chime in on some of the IT infrastructure there. But I do think the idea that when we began looking at the EHRM implementation, it was clear that in particular, some of these older sites, the core infrastructure necessary, the electrical capacity, the heating and cooling capacity in the closets, the cabling, they were not sufficient to be able to deploy. What I will say is the idea is to address the multiple core deployments, whether it be demos, whether it be EHRM, FMBT. VA certainly has a lot of large undertakings that include physical needs. The goal is to make sure that we've got that all taken care of. And I'll ask Mr. Brubaker if he wants to chime in on the IT investment in that piece of the infrastructure.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the question, General Bergman. You're absolutely right in your observation that we are transitioning to a more virtual environment. And we saw this during COVID when we saw more remote access and we significantly increased infrastructure investment to support telehealth applications. But your points related to 21st century applications and those efficiencies and that effectiveness that we can gain by adopting those throughout the department is spot on. And what we're doing from an infrastructure readiness perspective is we're inventorying all of our support, current support, but more importantly, what we're doing is we're developing a future state view of what we want the 21st century infrastructure to look like. And out of that comparison, we're developing a roadmap that will drive our IT investment management approach for the department so that we can get ahead of those infrastructure needs.
Well, thank you very much. We've got, as soon as you've got a visual roadmap, I'd love to see, we'd call it maybe a POA&M, for those who use that term. But the more we can see the timelines, the timelines ahead, it helps us as a committee come to grips with the true financial costs of different things. So with that, I'll yield back 20 seconds, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Bergman, General Bergman. I now call upon the chair of our Economic Opportunity Subcommittee, Representative Levin.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate today's hearing. I hope as we make these long overdue investments in VA infrastructure that we're going to consider populations that have long been marginalized, such as our women veterans. And I want to take just a moment and thank Representative Brownlee for her continued leadership with the Deborah Sampson Act, which, as we know, was enacted in January, takes important steps towards making VA infrastructure more welcoming to women. And that bill, that law requires VA to submit a plan to retrofit existing medical facilities to make it safer and easier for women veterans to get care and to ensure compliance with environment of care standards. Mr. Sims, what's the status of those efforts?
Thank you, Representative Levin. That's a good question. What I can say is that the assessment is ongoing. There are already projects in process, though. So, for example, in our previous strategic capital investment plan, the SKIP plan that we submitted in 21, there were already investments in facilities to address the access and needs of women veterans. So some of that is already in process. We're not going to stop those projects. They're going to continue to move forward through the funding and execution phase. But there is the assessment and plan to ensure that we're addressing all of the facilities and not just one or two projects. So that is still in process.
Well, thank you for that. My hope would be that for new facilities, such as those we're contemplating, we ought to pursue excellence in designing spaces that meet women veterans' needs from the outset. And in order to do that, we actually need to ask women veterans what they want and what they need. So, Mr. Sims, when designing new facilities, what processes are in place to survey the diverse veteran populations they're going to serve?
Great question. So there's several different methods that we use. Locally, we like to use things around town halls so that we're actually hearing the voice of the veteran, be able to contribute to plans for facilities and types of services there. There are more broader outreach efforts, particularly through the Veteran Experience Office, VEO, done through survey methods, and that would be through the enrollee surveys as well as other types of surveys on customer experience, post-visit to understand what the experience was of the veterans as they did receive care. So all of that goes into the individual projects. With that said, you're actually talking about trying to get ahead of that and actually build it into the design and standard. That is absolutely true. And one of the things that we're working at, as particularly we look at the large-scale recapitalization under the American Jobs Plan, is ensuring that we're working on those standards and designs now, so that when we do get funding and we are ready to move forward on those facilities, that we've got that type of future design, that future healthcare environment already defined, and it can be thrown into the execution process much quicker.
Thank you for that. I wanted to shift gears with the time we have left. Since 2015, VA facilities in at least 14 states, including my state of California, have had to cancel care or evacuate patients to other hospitals due to extreme weather events. So I was very concerned to learn that considerations of climate resilience were removed from the VA Sustainable Design, VA Sustainable Design Manual in 2017. And Mr. Sims, very simply, why were these references removed? And is VA considering restoring them in the next revision?
I can confirm that we're not only considering, but we have reinserted those climate adaptation requirements into the design manual. That has been completed. That's an activity that we undertook last month. So that is now complete. Those are now back into the design processes and standard documentation.
Mr. Sims, that is great news. And I appreciate your work in that regard. And I guess the last thing I would say, Mr. Chairman, with the time that I have, is that if you look back to recent polling on the American Jobs Plan, Politico and Morning Consult, the single most popular provision of the American Jobs Plan was modernizing veterans' hospitals. And it was popular not only with one political party or the other, but widely popular across the board. 78% of Republicans support modernizing veterans' hospitals, 86% of Democrats, 76% of independents. So let's stop with the politics. Let's get this done for our veterans. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Levin, for that information. That is very encouraging to know, and I think we're on the right track with this modernization effort. I would like to now recognize Representative Banks, a gentleman from Indiana, for 5 minutes. Mr. Banks has apparently left us. I now go to Mr. Is Mr. Mann available? Is Cawthorn? Is Mr. Cawthorn on okay. Or Mr. Rosendale? Oh yeah, Mr. Rosendale. Mr. Rosendale, we had to go down the list there. So Mr. Rosendale, I'll give you a couple of seconds to get yourself situated, and I'll recognize you for 5 minutes. And we'll begin the clock when you start.
Very good. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you assembling everyone, and I appreciate the testimony. I'm going to dive straight into my questions. Mr. Brubaker, the Office of Information and Technology requested $1.7 billion in the American Rescue Plan. We were told that that money was in the $17 billion package. Then it was out, and now it's unclear. How much of the American Rescue Plan, if any, are going towards OIT?
Thank you for that question, Representative Rosendale. So there is $100 million roughly that's being directed toward medical logistics, the DIMLS program in particular. The rest of the request is going to be a function of exactly where VHA decides to spend their money. In other words, we're looking at where those investments are going, and how we support those will wind up being a function of the programmatic and the workflow modernization and program modernization decisions that they undertake. So we stand ready to develop whatever cost estimates. We're working very closely with them to determine how that spend plan is going to shake out in the final analysis. But it was too fluid to put a final number on it. So that's why they backed away from a specific dollar figure.
So I sent a letter requesting justification for the IT funding while the committee was debating the American Rescue Plan. And I got a response back the day after the law was enacted, informing me that various VA offices were still deciding, just as you stated, on how to allocate most of the money. So in other words, Congress wrote a vague law, and unelected bureaucrats, no offense, are still, maybe still, deciding what to do with the money. Do you believe that's appropriate?
Well, sir, I think it's a function of having a broad number of needs and directing the money toward making sure that we've got the right prioritizations in place, and making sure that we're taking thoughtful measures to apply those dollars in a way that will maximize the value to mission and operational performance.
I understand that, but the American people elected Congress to appropriate and allocate those funds, and they hold us responsible. And if I'm sitting there trying to do my job and represent the people across the state of Montana properly, adequately, do you think it's appropriate for us to just go ahead and give not a blank check, but an amount of money and to allow an agency or department to allocate those funds wherever they feel?
Well, sir, I can't answer that specifically, but what I can tell you is that we'd be more than happy to come back to you with the spend plan that will show where those dollars are being allocated.
That would be very good. At least then I can report back. But from my standpoint, I'm uncomfortable that that list is coming after the funds were already appropriated instead of before those funds were appropriated. So the funds are appropriated, and now the list is going to come back. So you can see where the people across the state of Montana would be very uncomfortable with that process.
Yes, sir. I will take that back, and we'll get back to you with the spend plan.
Thank you so much. The administration seems to want more IT funding in the infrastructure package. How can we have any confidence that that money would actually even be allocated towards IT this time, regardless of what the bill may say?
Well, sir, I'm really glad you're bringing this up, because one of the things that we're putting in place at the department is an IT investment management strategy that is really data-driven. In the past, we have not had necessarily the highest level of fidelity on our independent lifecycle cost estimates, which you're well aware of. So what we're doing now is we're making sure that we're instilling a little rigor and discipline around that spending, so that you can have traceability of the dollars to the outcomes that we're looking to drive. And we're happy to share that plan with you as well.
Very good. All right. I do have some time left, but I would just yield that back to Mr. Chair, and I will look forward to getting those reports.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. I will now call upon the chair of our O&I subcommittee, Mr. Pappas, New Hampshire.
Thank you very much, Chairman Takano, and thank you to Ranking Member Boss as well for holding this session here today. This is such an important issue. It's one that veterans and VA workers in my district have lived for a number of years in terms of inadequate infrastructure and the impact that it has on the delivery of care and the services that are available to our veterans. So for more than a decade, our Manchester VA Medical Center has been plagued with an issue, fly infestations in operating rooms, which have been attributed to various attempts to fix the building's deteriorating structure over the years. The infestation is so problematic that the center is sometimes forced to temporarily close an operating room, sending veterans to other facilities for care or forcing them to delay those services. In 2017, in addition, an old water valve failed, causing a pipe on the hospital's top floor to burst, flooding many of the floors of the hospital. So these are just some of the situations that have forced veterans to delay or reschedule appointments and life-changing procedures. And we know through this hearing that the Manchester VA Medical Center is not alone in seeing this. There are hundreds of facilities across the country where we have seen issues crop up. I'm wondering if you have any assessment in terms of the impact on care, the disruptions to our veterans as a result of our deficient infrastructure, if that's something you measure. And I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Representative Pappas. First, let me say that, yes, I agree. Manchester is actually very prototypical of many of the VA sites out there, roughly 60 years old, maybe a few newer buildings, but the majority of it is older, more difficult to maintain. And what we spend money on is typically fixing the smaller issues as they arise. We hope we get to those things before problems occur, like water leaks and things like that. But it is an approach where we're fixing things rather than looking at actually recapitalizing the asset to be able to get out of that Band-Aid approach. So I agree with that. With that said, I do not have specific metrics, if you will. I do know that there are clearly scenarios where infrastructure failure has required, whether it be surgery or SPS or other things, to close for periods of time. I do not have specific metrics on that, but I'd be happy to take that for the record and we'll see what we can find for you.
Well, I'd appreciate that. I think it would be important to know how many appointments or procedures are delayed because of infrastructure issues like these, how much care VHA is referring to the community because of unplanned physical plant issues like the ones that I just described. So I appreciate any information you can provide there. And just maybe if I could ask a slightly different question, if you're quantifying the cost of aging infrastructure in terms of its impact on veterans' access to healthcare.
That's a great question and really a difficult one to answer. We fully believe that infrastructure is a requirement. It's an enabler for the quality of healthcare delivery. So there is a direct connection with what you're talking about, but it's really difficult to monetize that when we look at that. So there may be scenarios where there aren't closures, but it may be a poor veteran experience because of some physical infrastructure defects that we have. It's very difficult to monetize that. So we don't currently try to monetize that. Like I said, I think we can look at scenarios where there have been delays or closures because of physical infrastructure and see what we can find for you, but it isn't something that we typically would monetize.
Well, thanks. One other area that I wanted to bring to your attention is the issue of enhanced use leases. We know that this is an important issue, and I know that VA recently requested expanded scope and authority for enhanced use leases to ensure that the VA can lease unused property for other purposes beyond just supportive housing. And obviously, any initiative to increase housing for veterans is a good initiative. But I've seen this issue play out locally where VA's narrow EUL authority robs VA of the opportunity to leverage existing unused property to maximize services at VA. So I'm wondering if you could comment on the issue of these EULs and what expanded authority might do, and whether you sort of catalog the unused property and its potential availability for this purpose.
Sure, I can spend a little bit of time on that. We don't necessarily catalog the facilities on potential use. What we do is consistently review the portfolio Right now, the focus is supportive housing because that's all we can do under the EUL authority. But as we look at some of these projects, what we found is that if we could throw in complementary uses, so for example, if we could allow some office space for a local VSO to operate in or for a job training program to operate in, that would allow for some revenue generation, not for VA, but for the developer of the facility to help finance the project, they could actually deliver more housing projects and finance more housing projects. So the goal isn't necessarily to look for completely different uses, it's to look for broader ability to execute supportive housing and the associated amenities that would come along with that.
Well, thanks for your thoughts. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Pappas. I now call upon the chair of our Technology Modernization Subcommittee, Mr. Mervan of Indiana. Mr. Mervan, you were muted. Why don't you try again? Why don't you unmute and then start again?
Chairman Takano, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Here you go.
Yeah, appreciate it. Mr. Sims, on Tuesday, VA's Inspector General released a report indicating the cost estimates for the physical infrastructure upgrades associated with the EHRM are unreliable and underreported. Has VA done a thorough review of its facilities to identify shortfalls that could limit VA's IT modernization efforts as well as the EHRM program?
Thank you for that question. I think the answer is no, and I believe that's sort of what the IG finding was pointing out, is that some of the cost estimates for the physical infrastructure component related to EHRM, not necessarily the IT infrastructure, but the physical infrastructure, the estimates were done more off of a ballpark figure initially. And then while it was refined, it wasn't necessarily done via assessment. And I think that's a key term you used, is actually assessing the infrastructure to get more specific costs and more reliable costs. Anytime the Inspector General or GAO looks at a cost estimate, they're looking for their quality aspects of that cost estimate. I think it's pretty clear in this case that we've still got some more work to do. So I think the answer to your question is no, but we are working on that component of it.
Has the VA done a thorough review of its facilities to identify the shortfalls that could limit VA's IT modernization efforts? Oh, I'm sorry, I understand that the VA is adjusting the methodology used to estimate costs of physical infrastructure upgrades related to the EHRM. When does VA expect to have a reliable estimate of these costs? And do you have a ballpark figure?
I do not have a ballpark figure. I know that that work is ongoing, but I will have to get back to you and take that for the record as far as when that estimate would be available.
And I'm assuming that if the physical infrastructure costs were underestimated, that the IT infrastructure costs likely were as well. Is VA also working on a reevaluating the IT infrastructure cost estimate? If so, when will that be available?
Sir, this is Paul Brubaker speaking for OI&T. We're in the process of reassessing the infrastructure readiness needs. I don't have a timeline for you, but I'm happy to take that for the record and get back to you with a timeline.
Thank you very much. At this time, I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. I now call upon Mr. Sablan from the Northern Mariana Islands. Mr. Sablan, 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Sims, sir, throughout your testimony, you discussed plans for the billions of dollars the President is requesting in the AJP to modernize, replace, or establish new facilities that will provide our veterans the care they deserve. The focus appears to be on VA medical centers, but there are smaller facilities or areas without a facility, like in my district, the Northern Mariana Islands, and other outlying areas or rural areas within the state that should also be given attention if the goal is truly about providing quality care to our veterans. I therefore need to ask, how will this funding benefit the areas such as my district, which has a fee-based outreach small facility or no facility at all?
Thank you for that question. So first, let me say that the focus areas that I referred to that the $18 billion would be used in are really VA and the administration's ideas. And we have briefed those to all corners of the Hill staff, but we're open to having discussions on potential other uses. So VA's focus was intended on our owned infrastructure to be able to address some of those facility condition issues that we've been talking about and try to get that recapitalization underway on some of those facilities. With that said, we do understand that leasing in particular for rural areas is one of the ways that we've done it. We've typically addressed that through our regular budget process. And for smaller leases, we have not had any concerns or issues with getting the necessary funding or the approval for those leases. So most of that is done through the traditional budget process and planning processes that we have.
So, Mr. Sims, with all due respect, I'm claiming my time. If you just said you haven't heard issues about those smaller outreach, then you have never heard of me before today, sir. Because I have been bringing this up all my 12, 13 years, going on 13 years now in Congress about veterans in my district getting absolutely very little service. And whether you serve a veteran in a medical center or a veteran in a fee-based facility, they are both entitled, they both deserve, they both earn the service the VA is supposed to serve. So let me go on with my next question, please. Infrastructure is not just physical spaces, it includes human capital, investments in workforce development, and expanded recruitment and retention of the workforce. How does the VA plan to address human capital issues in rural areas, again, whether they're in the state or in the territories? Mr. Sims, please.
So I'm going to ask Ms. Bongiorni to address that.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you, Congressman, for the question. We agree it's critically important for us to address human capital, especially in rural areas. We try to focus on developing the staff that we have, bringing in temporary partners from outside, and building the rural talent pipeline. So right now we have a program where we assist rural faculty with development and essentially teach them how to teach so that we can assist them in supporting graduate medical education programs. And we are aware that that actually improves the retention of those staff. We also have a partnership with Public Health Service to bring in commissioned Corps officers into facilities in VA. There are currently 36 on board.
Thank you, Ms. Bonjour, thank you for that. Again, that applies to where there are facilities. Where are no facilities, the veterans apparently do not deserve the same treatment as veterans where there are facilities. This is where I'm getting to. You're not going to put in a doctor to a fee-based clinic. I mean, a naval doctor or a public health doctor or, a graduate student, right? I mean, just makes sense. So let me ask again, Mr. Sims, your testimony states the Choice Act authorized the department to provide up to 1,500 additional GME positions. I guess Ms. Bonjour just actually responded to this question. And so let me ask generally, do any of the new or existing programs address the shortages in our areas, in the Northern Marianas in particular? You do the CBOXer and you've addressed 70–80% of the problems our veterans face. Any idea? Do you have any idea where the Northern Marianas is? The population of our VA here, our veterans here?
I do not have those statistics, sir.
So that means they're not in your plans. Unfortunately, that's very regrettable. I'm sorry they don't. I will bring this up to your department in another time, but I thank you for your testimony today, all of you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Sablan. I now call upon Representative Dr. Miller Meeks, Iowa. Dr. Miller Meeks, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair Takano and Ranking Member Bost. And thank you for all the panelists that are here presenting to us today. Certainly, we've heard a lot about VA infrastructure and given what's happening currently in the construction market, I have some concerns. I've certainly heard from people throughout my district home builders with access to housing, with the supply chain that lumber, steel are all at all-time highs. So Mr. Sims, the 4 medical centers that the VA most recently built took an average of 10.5 years from authorization to activation. Your major construction projects have been ongoing for more than 9 years on average. Your goal to open new leased clinics is about 5 years, and it typically takes longer. These timelines seem to be incredibly long. If the Biden infrastructure bill passes and the VA goes on a building boom, how are any of these hypothetical projects going to be completed in the timeframes needed?
Thank you for the question. So I think it's fair to say that we have made progress in some areas, but there's much work to do. For example, in the leasing program, major leases used to take 4 years from the point at which they were authorized to the point at which we awarded them. So the majority of the time was on VA side getting them awarded before it was ever started construction. We've cut that time down to 2 years. So we've cut it in half so that we're able to get those leases awarded and construction started in a much quicker time frame. We're looking to do similar things on the construction side for our major projects there. And a lot of it comes down to, as I mentioned before, ensuring that the designs and the standardization that we put into these facilities is executable by our industry partners, and that there aren't changing requirements that would cause unnecessary delays, both in time and in cost. So those are pieces of what we're working on. We're also looking at different ways to actually acquire the facilities. So things like the design bid build process that we used in the past, we're now looking at scenarios where we can do design build scenarios. So single contract awards, be able to execute much quicker, but that takes coordination with our industry partners and our federal partners like the Army Corps of Engineers. But we are working to streamline that delivery so that any funding moving forward, whether it be through the American Jobs Plan or our regular appropriation, we're executing so that those projects are on time and delivered sooner.
Thank you. And the normal process as to build a medical center is that the VA puts a prospectus in the budget, Congress authorizes it. Typically, we approve funding increments as the project moves along. The White House seems to want to do that backwards. In other words, for Congress to authorize all the projects and appropriate all the money up front. Is that an accurate characterization of the current proposal?
So let me ask clarification. Are you talking about the American Jobs Plan piece?
Yes, sir.
Okay. To be honest, we have not talked about the authorization component of that funding because we haven't identified the specific sites or projects that large scale dollars would be used for. The initial $3 billion of immediate need, we're not anticipating that would be used for major construction. That would be mostly non-recurring maintenance and minor construction that would not require the authorization piece. But yes, we will have to address authorization for those sites on recapitalization once we've got the details in place.
And we essentially don't have a lot of information now, as you alluded. And your testimony mentions a ranking process to identify the new medical centers to be built. Does the VA intend to tell us the result of that ranking process before or after legislation has been enacted?
So I will say that VA does intend to share the tiered ranking that we're working on now. I cannot speak for the timeline of when the legislation may move or in what form, but we do intend to continue to push forward because whether the funding is through the jobs plan or in the future through our regular budget, we do want to ensure we're investing in the right location. So we will share that with Congress.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I yield back my time.
Thank you, Dr. Miller-Meeks. I now recognize Representative Underwood from the state of Illinois. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we consider the funding that will be needed to improve both access to care and outcomes for our veterans, we must ensure that upgrades to the Department of Veterans Affairs physical infrastructure are coupled with necessary investments in VA's workforce, especially the department's mental health workforce. Last year, the VA's Office of the Inspector General found severe occupational staffing shortages for mental health professionals across VA facilities, including nurse practitioners specializing in mental health and substance use disorders. As a registered nurse, I know that nurses can play an important role in filling healthcare workforce shortages at VA, particularly in mental health and addiction. Ms. Bongiorni, as we discuss infrastructure improvements that are needed at VA, can you expand on the most pressing mental health workforce shortages in VHA facilities where additional investments in nurse practitioners or other mental health professionals might be most urgently needed?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. We agree that investing in our mental health workforce is very critical to us. For the last several years, we have had a mental health hiring initiative and a sustainment initiative in place to make sure that we are tracking very closely how things are going with recruitment and retention for mental health positions. In particular, psychiatrists are difficult to obtain. There are not enough of them out there in the marketplace. We offer, for all of our psychiatrists, the options for education debt reduction program, so they can pay back their student loans. Psychologists are also in the top 3 occupations that utilize that debt reduction program, and we maximize the use of recruitment and retention flexibilities. We are also continuing to expand the types of positions that we recruit for, to include licensed professional mental health counselors and marriage and family therapists, so that we're expanding the full range of services we can offer in mental health.
As we consider VA's mental health workforce needs broadly, we must also focus specifically on access to mental and behavioral health care for pregnant and postpartum veterans. In my state of Illinois, mental health conditions and substance use disorders are the leading cause of pregnancy-related death. And for veterans, the risk could be even greater. 1 in 3 women veterans report that they experienced military sexual trauma, which is linked with mental health conditions and risk factors for pregnancy-related complications. And that's why I'm so proud that the House passed my Protecting Moms Who Served Act with unanimous bipartisan support earlier this month. My bill would codify and strengthen VA's maternity health care coordination program, which includes mental health screenings and treatments for veterans suffering from postpartum depression, anxiety, substance use disorders, or related conditions. Ms. Bongiorni, what steps is VA taking to ensure that the department's mental health workforce can meet the needs of veterans with prenatal or postpartum mental and behavioral health conditions?
Thank you. That's great news about that bill moving forward. And I know that our Women's Health Office has been looking closely at what's going on with maternal health. And we are assisting them with evaluating their staffing needs and looking at diverse recruitment and retention strategies. So we'd be happy to discuss that with you further.
And does that include the mental and behavioral health specialists that would be serving those prenatal and postpartum veterans?
Yes, we are always looking to make sure we're recruiting more of those.
Okay, fabulous. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Representative Underwood. I now recognize Representative Allred from the state of Texas.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel for being with us and your testimony on the needs of the VA and how President Biden's American Jobs Plan can assist with meeting VA's priorities. And, I just wanted to talk really quickly about other forms of acquisition of VA facilities, because in April of 2020, after I'd led a months-long effort, a bipartisan effort, we were able to get a VA facility in my district in Garland that was donated. It was a hospital that was vacant, that had been recently used, but it was no longer being used. We got that donated to the VA. And prior to that addition, the Dallas VA Medical Center in South Dallas had an 80-year-old building where they had 17 days, where on any given day they had 40 to 80 veterans waiting for temporary care for a bed at the VA facility there. And there were no facilities on the northeast side of the DFW area, forcing veterans to drive miles and hours of traffic to get to that facility. Not only was that the facility in Garland made almost immediately available to treat COVID-19 veterans, it's since begun offering care to all veterans in the area and will eventually help us better serve 184,000 veterans and create 5,000 jobs. So I'm obviously proud of that acquisition. Mr. Sims, I wanted to ask you how VA can leverage donations of existing medical facilities to address our infrastructure needs beyond constructing brand new facilities, which are often expensive, and what resources the VA would need to ensure that model could work.
Thank you, Congressman, for that question. That's a great example of a unique opportunity that presented itself, and VA was able to take advantage of that Garland facility, actually multiple facilities, multiple buildings as part of that. So let me talk a little bit about one of the unique authorities that we have, which is the Chip-In Act, which is a donation ability for VA to partner with third parties that are going to ultimately donate a usable facility, including any of the improvements and the underlying land, to VA. VA does have the ability to contribute funding to those. Those are not always brand new facilities. So we've done one chip-in example in Omaha, and that Omaha facility was completed. It was constructed by the third party and donated to VA last year. So we've completed that one. And in last year, 2021's budget request, we asked for additional funding for a Tulsa project that is underway and going to be completed under the chip-in authority. So in cases like that, the ultimate facilities are donated to VA. In the case of Tulsa, it's a partnership with the university, with the city of Tulsa, and with a nonprofit who's leading the development effort there. But it's a refurbishment of an existing facility. So it isn't a brand new facility. It is a recapitalization of that facility, but it isn't necessarily a new facility. So chip-in is one of the ways we've been successful. It's only a couple of examples, but it is another way. We do have the ability to accept straight donations. In the case of the Garland example, that was not a chip-in project, that was a straight donation. Unfortunately, we have not found too many people willing to actually donate large facilities, but we do have the authority to do that as one unique way of acquiring facilities if there's an opportunity that presents itself.
Okay, well, thanks, Mr. Sims. I'll just say this. I would like to see that process streamlined. It was extremely difficult to get that facility accepted. We got a lot of pushback from the national VA, even though my local VA was working very hard to have that happen. That was under a previous administration. But I want to see that process streamlined. If you have someone willing to donate a facility worth $400 million, we should be able to take it pretty easily, in my opinion. The next thing I'll just say is that, VA facilities, just like anyone, are vulnerable to natural disasters. In February, Texas had a terrible winter storm that y'all might have seen. And we had a number of shutdowns of our facilities that led to power outages, burst pipes, and interruptions of every Texan's lives, of course. But the Fort Worth VA clinic faced burst pipes and flooding of 2 floors. And despite the hard work of the VA staff, the clinic was forced to remain closed until mid-April. Now, I know these types of weather interruptions are only going to increase with the impacts of climate change. So I just wanted to ask how the VA can protect against these natural disasters, how we can harden our facilities, and what the American Jobs Plan would do to help you deal with those kinds of crises.
Great question. So we are focusing on what I'll call climate adaptation and resiliency. So that's really where we're looking at what impact those weather type events could have on our facilities and operations. So what impacts can we plan for and what can't we plan for? We're also cognizant of the fact that we don't want to over design in some of these cases. The events in Texas with the temperatures and the pipes burst, we can't over design and therefore drive up the cost of these facilities too much. But we are working on the adaptation, both from weather as well as sea level rise being another example. We've got facilities in floodplains that we are looking at and how we can use adaptation and resiliency. The example you gave is one where leased facility, so not a VA-owned facility, had much more challenges in getting back operational than the actual medical centers. So we do clearly have better resiliency standards in the owned facilities, but we are looking at that broadly as we adopt a climate change action plan required under Executive Order 14008.
Yeah, that's a good point. That was not our facility. That was a leased facility. And I've talked to our folks, and I know that that's why we weren't able to have a backup in place and all of the issues. But with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. I know I went over. I'll yield back.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Allred. Why don't we, I will now call upon and recognize Representative Slotkin from the state of Michigan.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our witnesses. I wanted to take a little bit of a stand back strategic sort of line of questioning on the Air Commission, which is I'm concerned that we're about to make a bunch of decisions, really consequential decisions across the country on data that predates COVID. And, you know, COVID had this massive once in a generation impact on our healthcare system. It had a massive impact on VA health. I was just at our Lansing community-based outreach center a couple of weeks ago, and what they have done with telehealth is really phenomenal. And I just, you know, from what we heard from the veterans who were there, from the doctors, nurses, it's like, we're not just swinging back to kind of the old way. We're going to try and hopefully, I think at the local level, take some of those good lessons. So how am I supposed to understand the results of the Air Commission if they don't take into account COVID, or am I missing something and that's the plan? Maybe Mr. Sims, if you can answer that for me.
Thank you. A very complex question. So let's start with, I think it's true that there are some impacts of COVID when it relates to facilities that we have learned. Things like the ability to manage the airflow in facilities became critically important during COVID. Some facilities had the right HVAC systems and air filtration in place to manage it, others did not. The patient flow in emergency rooms was an area that we saw that if you didn't have the right setup, patient flow in and out of emergency rooms was extremely difficult to manage. So there are lessons learned that have been taken from COVID. With that said, you're exactly right. There are clearly trends in the delivery modalities that veterans prefer that were forced one direction. So they went to a virtual only environment because they could not get to the VA. We are still waiting to see how that looks post-COVID. So that is a fair example that is not going to be baked into the AIR recommendations today, but keep in mind the AIR Commission will be debating for approximately a year in next year, where we're hoping to see some of those trends before final recommendations and decisions are made to be able to work that in.
Okay, I would say it's pretty darn important, I think, to have a once in a generation pandemic, you know, and the lessons learned, particularly on telehealth, factored in somewhere. But with that, can you, and sorry if I've missed it, can you give me the official VA opinion on the timing of the AIR report and its implementation? You know, what is the official position? You support it? You are ready to execute? Just what's the official VA position on that?
So at this point, we are following the statute as passed. There are timelines set up in the statute. The most current one that will be coming out, and someone may have mentioned it earlier, but the publication of the Section 203 criteria is on target for by the 31st. So by the 1st of next week, we are looking at publishing that criteria according to statute. There are certainly things that are not VA's control, things like nominations for the AIR Commission that we are still working with the administration on, but we are following the guidelines in statute and the timelines in statute at this point.
Okay. Well, Mr. Chairman, I think it would be useful to continue to have briefings on the AIR Commission. Certainly those of us who are keenly watching the puts and takes of where things go and where things are removed. And, you know, if you can take that back, Mr. Sims, that there's a number of us, I think, who are interested in staying focused on this and getting, you know, full briefings as we go forward. But with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Slotkin, for your engagement on the AIR Commission. It is an important issue. I will say that with Ms. Slotkin's question, that will complete the questioning of the first panel. I want to thank our VA witnesses for appearing today, and we'll now move on to our second panel. Mr. Mervan, everyone's dying to know whether you have Mr. Visklowski somewhere in your office, because we could have swore we saw him sit in your chair as you were.
Yes, it was a very quick sighting, Chairman Takano, and all he wanted to do was take a look at the modern technology of how the committee hearings are being advanced. So you are correct. You did have a very quick sighting, and he didn't realize the camera was on, but Congressman Visklowski wanted to say hello to all of you.
Well, we all say hello back.
Yes. Yes. He was astonished on how things have advanced technology-wise.
Oh, he's only been he's only been gone for a year. But anyway.
Correct. He just wanted to see how the committee hearings were running, and he sat just very quickly.
Okay, well, wonderful. Well, I now call up and recognize our second panel. First, I want to announce that the Honorable Anthony Principi, former Secretary of Veterans Affairs from 2001 to 2005, is with us today. We're also joined by Mr. Philip Longman, author of Best Care Anywhere, Why VA Healthcare is Better Than Yours. Appearing on behalf of the Independent Budget Veteran Service Organizations, we have Mr. Patrick Murray, Director of the National Legislative Service, Veterans of Foreign Wars, accompanied by Ms. Joy Elam, National Legislative Director, Disabled American Veterans, and Mr. Morgan Brown, Legislative Director, Paralyzed Veterans of America. And we also have with us Mr. Bruce Carruthers from the steering committee. He's the steering committee member of Save Our VA. Mr. Principi, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, and members of the committee. It is indeed a privilege to appear before this committee. 4 years ago, I testified before this committee about the need for VA's medical infrastructure to keep pace with the transformation of VA medicine. That hearing and the work of your committee and your counterparts in the Senate helped lead to the Mission Act, which was signed into law with overwhelming bipartisan support, a law that included the establishment of a VA Asset and Infrastructure Review Commission. I commend the committee for this accomplishment. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Boss, and members of the committee, VA's healthcare system is a critical and vital national resource. The department's partnership with America's medical schools revolutionized academic medicine and dramatically improved quality of care in VA medical centers across the nation. VA research teams have participated in hundreds of important advances in medicine, such as the development of the CAT scan. They have created improved artificial limbs, such as the Seattle foot, and were instrumental in finding a cure for tuberculosis and improving lives of many with Parkinson's disease. They developed the first nicotine patch, improved the value of low-dose aspirin therapy in preventing heart attacks. And for critically wounded veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan, VA developed a national system of polytrauma centers to address the devastating injuries many have suffered. VA system is especially valuable because it is able to provide specialized care for the unique medical issues veterans face, such as prosthetic care, spinal cord injury, TBI, and mental health care. And VA welcomes all veterans, whatever their background. Here's an example. When New York City was hit hard and early by the AIDS epidemic, its VA hospitals in the metropolitan area were not spared. One of the very first cases of AIDS was seen in 1979 at the VA Medical Center in Manhattan, 4 years before the virus that caused the disease was discovered. I saw firsthand how the people at the Manhattan VA and VAs across the nation pulled together in support of a group and that group's time of need. That same spirit of inclusion it guides VA's often commended response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Having had the privilege to serve as Deputy Secretary of VA during the senior President Bush administration, as Secretary for 4 years for President George W. Bush, I have a keen appreciation and respect for VA's healthcare system. It has done wonderful things for our veterans, our country, and the world. The Community Care Program the Mission Act authorized was designed to meet the healthcare needs of today's veterans when VA cannot do so. What it does not and should not do is replace VA's patient care infrastructure with private care providers. We must do everything in our power to ensure VA healthcare remains a vibrant system in terms of its infrastructure, its people, and technologies. To keep VA's healthcare system dynamic, though, the department must continue to conform to the changes that have taken place in healthcare delivery in the United States and to the changing demographics of the veteran population. I don't believe the system can stay static. If it does, I fear it will perish. Many VA medical centers, as you know, were built in an era when medical care was synonymous with hospital care. The VA facilities built after the First and Second World Wars are huge, with the capacity to care for thousands of patients at a time. However, the transformation of VA care from hospital-centric to patient-centric care means some of those medical centers are woefully underutilized. The asset and infrastructure review now underway at the VA is a process that will design, improve, and implement a comprehensive long-term plan to modernize and realign VA's healthcare infrastructure. The review, scheduled to be completed in 2023, I believe offers the possibility of a future for VA healthcare that will provide quality, readily accessible, and cost-effective care directly through VHA medical centers and clinics. But the review can only be successful if Congress acts on the recommendations of this important commission. Having chaired the 2005 Military Base Realignment and Closure BRAC Commission, I know that recommendations for realignment and closure have profound effects on communities and the people who live and work in these communities. However, as I told this committee in 2017, if VA does not realign itself, the current decline in the veteran population will make some VA medical center museums of the past, not the guideposts for the future they should be. Keeping VA strong and a vibrant direct patient care system requires changes in the way it delivers healthcare. In conclusion, I commend President Biden for including in his infrastructure proposal an investment of $18 billion in VA infrastructure. I know some of those needs, as was expressed earlier, are urgent, but I would hope that they would be viewed in context of the recommendations that the Air Commission will make to you in the not too distant future. I apologize for being over. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Secretary Principi. I will now call upon Mr. Longman for 5 minutes. Mr. Longman.
Thank you. Hold on for a second. Having a little technical difficulty here all of a sudden. Thank you, Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Bost and other members of the committee. And thank you for your invitation to testify for this important topic. My name is Phil Longman, and I'm currently the Policy Director at the Open Markets Institute, where I focus on the growing problem of corporate monopoly in the healthcare sector. I'm also a senior editor at the Washington Monthly and serve on the advisory board of the Veterans Healthcare Policy Institute. My involvement in healthcare issues for veterans began in 1999 with the death of my wife, Robin, to breast cancer. I never blamed her doctors for her demise, but the chaotic and poorly coordinated care that we experienced at one very prestigious academic medical center here in the nation's capital sent me on a journey. I wanted to find out who might have ideas for improving the safety and quality of American healthcare. I wrote the surprising results of my research in a book called Best Care Anywhere. In it, I described how a large and growing peer-reviewed literature showed that on metric after metric, the much maligned Veterans Health Administration had been outperforming the rest of the US healthcare system. The book, which is now in its third edition, led to my being appointed in 2015 to serve on the Commission on Care. This commission was charged by Congress and the White House with developing a strategic plan for the future of VA healthcare. Based on this background, I would like to offer the committee some following observations. First, in dealing with the VA, don't forget to ask the compared to what question. You all remember in 2014, the VA suffered enormous reputational damage following damning national headlines about unacceptable wait times at some VA facilities. I argued at the time, and as subsequent studies have confirmed, wait times at the VA were no worse in aggregate than those found throughout the rest of the healthcare system. Since then, research shows that in 3 out of 4 specialties evaluated, access to care at the VA now surpasses access to VA in the private sector. Yet perversely, many people are still under the impression that we need to privatize and outsource more VA healthcare because otherwise veterans will have to wait too long for treatment. Second, beware false thrift. The VA, despite all of its upheavals of recent years, continues to offer care that, as a rule, combines higher quality with lower cost. Recently, for example, researchers at Stanford compared veterans who received emergency room treatment at the VA with veterans who were treated at non-VA hospitals for emergency care. The VA patients not only had a 45% better survival advantage, but the cost of their care was 25% below what the private sector hospitals were charging. Meanwhile, the kind of coordinated primary and mental health care offered by the VA is generally not available at any price in the private sector. Such findings underscore the reality that while it's appropriate for the VA to outsource some specialty services in some locations, in general, outsourcing will lead to poorly coordinated, lower quality care that ill-serves veterans and is far more expensive to taxpayers. Third, learn the lessons of the pandemic. COVID revealed and aggravated vast, long-standing racial, class, and regional inequalities in our healthcare system. After years of closing and downsizing hospitals, particularly in rural and low-income urban areas, more and more Americans now live in places that have become medical deserts. At the same time, even rich hospitals have put margin over mission too often, with the result that they have virtually no surge capacity left and have cut back on routine services that don't offer them high financial returns. This argues that far from shrinking VA healthcare and VA capacity, we should be expanding its public health mission and giving more people access to it. Finally, consider using the VA to combat the growing problem of healthcare monopolies. The majority of Americans now live in areas dominated by one large monopolistic healthcare system, such as Partners in Boston or UPMC in Pittsburgh, or Sutter in the San Francisco area. In such places, the local VA hospital is often providing the only remaining effective competition in the local healthcare market. Shut down these local VA hospitals in these areas, and what will happen? Not only will veterans face lower quality care and more problems of access, but also everyone seeking care in the community, veterans and non-veterans, will be exposed to just that much more monopoly pricing for everything from dialysis to lab work to hospital stays. In conclusion, the widespread cornering of local healthcare markets by predatory corporate healthcare giants makes expanding the VA's role in the US healthcare system all the more urgent and in the public interest. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Longman. I will now call upon Mr. Murray. You're recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony. Mr. Murray.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, and members of the committee. On behalf of the Independent Budget Veteran Service Organizations, the IBVSOs, a partnership between VAV, PVA, and the VFW, thank you for the opportunity to offer our comments regarding how to strengthen and sustain the infrastructure. For more than 30 years, the IBVSOs have developed and presented recommendations to ensure that VA remains appropriately funded and capable of carrying out all aspects of its mission to serve our nation's ill and injured veterans, their caregivers, surviving spouses, and children, both now and in the future. While VA has received increased funding levels, a persistent lack of resources for facilities management, modernization, and personnel continues to negatively impact access for an increasing number of veterans. VA's aging infrastructure not only causes many veterans to wait too long and travel too far for care, but also potentially endangers the health and lives of veteran patients and VA personnel. Last November at the VA Medical Center in West Haven, Connecticut, an aging campus built mostly in the 40s and 50s, while performing what should have been a routine maintenance job, ended in tragedy when an overpressured event occurred, killing 2 men and injuring 3 other people. Earlier this month, the GV Sonny Montgomery VA Medical Center in Jackson, Mississippi announced the closing of its dialysis treatment center due to aging infrastructure. These are just 2 recent examples of how failure of properly maintaining infrastructure can impact veterans' access to care and present risks for employees. Improperly maintained facilities and equipment can lead to loss of money, services, and unfortunately, in some cases, a loss of life. Infrastructure can be a life safety issue and needs to be treated with the appropriate level of attention. Our nation's infrastructure needs improvements. and a proposed infusion of $18 billion for VA facilities is potentially part of a larger infrastructure package. The IBVSOs are very appreciative of this proposal, and given the gap in funded by VA's skip process, such an infusion is certainly justified. However, given the current focus and attention to this issue, we believe it's time to consider wholesale transformation, beginning with the revamping of the Strategic Capital Investment Planning, or SCIP process, keyword planning. While VA's SCIP list contains all VA's major and minor construction, non-recurring maintenance, and leasing projects, VA's budget requests regularly fail to request the full SCIP funding estimates or priorities. The SCIP process does not provide a chronological list of anticipated repairs, renovations, and replacement of facilities. At best, SCIP provides non-binding suggestions to the VA budget process, which are regularly bypassed, resulting in an ever-increasing backlog of overdue maintenance and construction projects. This is not an actual planning process. The SCIP needs to be overhauled to reflect the actual needs and priorities of VA's physical footprint. In reference to the $18 billion proposed infusion, in VA's own testimony, they stated, to determine the most appropriate investments for the recapitalization effort, VA will leverage data-driven processes to identify potential sites. Why is that information not already determined? What is the purpose of having a SCIP process if it's not to determine priorities in infrastructure? The SCIP process needs to change to reflect a real-time list of projects so they can be completed in order based on priority. Insufficient VA personnel is also an obstacle to timely and cost-effective infrastructure maintenance and construction. The IBVSOs recommend that VA increase its internal capacity to plan and manage infrastructure and construction projects by hiring additional personnel with subject matter expertise in the Office of Construction and Facilities Management, within each VISN and at every VA medical center. Congress should also consider utilizing the Army Corps of Engineers to manage some or all of VA's major construction projects, as well as private sector construction management services to increase timeliness and cost effectiveness. Although personnel are not normally considered to be part of an organization's infrastructure, the lack of sufficient competent professionals to run and maintain an organization certainly limits its capabilities. For example, if there is an insufficient number of health providers, it decreases the VA's ability to meet veterans' demand for care in a timely manner. Likewise, insufficient nursing staff levels reduces the number of available beds and hinders their ability to provide care for patients. Filling vacant positions is critical to ensuring that veterans can receive VA-provided care in a timely manner. Therefore, VA must request and Congress must provide sufficient authorities and funding to fully staff VA in order to eliminate gaps in healthcare employees. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Boss, this concludes our testimony, and we'd be pleased to respond to any questions you or the members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. I will now recognize and call on Mr. Carruthers for 5 minutes. Mr. Carruthers, let's try to unmute and then begin again. There you are. All right, go ahead and begin.
Good afternoon, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm a service-connected Vietnam veteran and a retired VA employee. I'm here on behalf of Veterans for Peace, Save Our VA national campaign. Like the vast majority of veterans, our members trust the care they receive from the VA. They support a robust, fully funded, and fully staffed VA. We are invited here today to discuss physical infrastructure, human resources, and systems of support. The facilities of the Veterans Health Administration are in need of repair, upgrading, and expansion. We cannot, however, define infrastructure simply as a physical plant. For a medical entity to provide high-quality care, it must be properly configured, well-maintained, fully staffed, and supported by proper systems. The average age of VA buildings is 60 years, and 69% of its main hospitals are at least 50 years old. Some are in good shape, but the fundamental issue is that even if they are maintained, the buildings are not designed to deliver modern health care. Many cannot accommodate treatment modalities and technologies developed since they were built. In FY 18 and 19, Congress approved a combined $4 billion for VA construction. However, VA estimates it requires between 49 and 59 billion to bring online any new or expanded facilities, and that it would cost $22 billion to address poor or failing conditions at existing sites. Compounding the issue of outdated facilities, VHA currently reports 37,000 vacant positions. Some 28,000 of these are listed as unfunded. It is not clear from the definition provided if the medical centers have the resources to fill these vacancies. The VA Inspector General reports that in FY 2020, there were severe vacancies in medical officers and nurses, and this has been the case since 2014. Shortages also exist in other crucial occupations such as medical technologists, diagnostic radiologic technologists, and human resource management. The IGA was particularly concerned with HR as these positions are critical to filling vacancies. An unknown factor that is not addressed in the IG findings is the staffing level that is actually necessary for VHA to meet its mission, including the additional demands put on VA by legislative and executive action, as well as the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. It is likely that the number of required positions compared to authorized FTE is higher than the 37,000 cited. An updated and expanded VHA infrastructure that is fully staffed requires systems of support. Modern medicine increasingly relies on computer-assisted programs for diagnosis and test results, and an integrated medical record and telemedicine. VHA is a leader in telemedicine field now and is poised to take its contact centers to a new level that will allow veterans to call in and be referred for a telehealth visit or a same-day access visit. This will create a one-stop model. This initiative is much more sophisticated than anything in the private sector. This and other such initiatives should be supported. There are strong voices that claim infrastructure is solely a brick and mortar issue. To be effective, however, a medical infrastructure program must include personnel and support systems. If VHA is not properly configured, fully staffed, and supported, it cannot accomplish its four missions: healthcare, education, research, and national preparedness. Diverting veterans to the private sector and the community program is not a viable option. There is already a shortage of physicians and is projected to grow over the next decade. According to an article in Human Resources for Health, there will be physician shortages throughout the country by 2030. Rural areas are experiencing hospital closures at an alarming rate. Since 2005, 176 rural hospitals have closed, with 100 closing between January 13 and February 2020, according to Government Accountability Office. 1 in 4 rural hospitals are at high financial risk of closing. When rural hospitals close, residents must travel substantially further to access healthcare services. Perhaps most important, VHA offers a holistic, integrated approach to healthcare. In VHA, veterans have access to a complete array of treatment modalities and personnel to address all their medical and psychological issues. Private sector patients face a fragmented and often cumbersome system that relies on individuals to secure the proper care. The price of war must always include the cost of caring for those who serve. This is a sacred trust, and the best way to keep the nation's promise is to ensure that VHA is a robust entity that will serve veterans well into the future. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee on this vital issue, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Carruthers, for your testimony. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes for the first for this round of questioning. My first question goes to Mr. Longman. Based on your broader experience commenting on healthcare and your time on the Commission on Care, can you discuss the importance of maintaining a robust healthcare infrastructure and the impact not only on the pandemic has had, but the growing healthcare monopolies are having on access to care? Mr. Longman, why don't you go ahead and begin again? You're muted still.
Sorry. Yes, thank you for that question. I do think it's very important as we consider VA infrastructure planning, and by extension, the strategic future of the VA, that we have an integrated vision of how the VA interacts and connects with the larger healthcare system. So as I said in my earlier remarks, the larger healthcare system out there, as all of us who are in it kind of know, is rapidly consolidating into very powerful local monopolies. There's a vast literature showing that this high degree of corporate concentration is driving healthcare costs up dramatically and lowering, importantly, options, because these profit maximizing healthcare corporations are shedding capacity in order to maximize profit. So any kind of surge capacity is gone. Any kind of service that doesn't have a high margin, like mental health services, like primary care, gets underrepresented. So around the country, we have a system where we're in crying need for more capacity, right? And yet we're at least looking at scenarios in which the VA would be radically downsizing. You know, my work on the Commission on Care, included getting the commission to recommend pilot projects where we could look at ways to expand access to the VA, particularly in those areas where, as Mr. Principi points out, due to changing demographics and migration patterns, we may not have enough veterans in certain areas to keep a safe flow of patients in a local VA hospital. But rather than shut down that hospital, we should look at ways of increasing the amount of eligibility people have to serve in that, to have access to that hospital. So on the commission, we explored, for example, scenarios in which spouses of veterans would be able to use their Medicare entitlement to purchase care in VA facilities that are wanting for more volume. This is kind of a win-win situation.
Mr. Longman, I share your concern on that particular regard, but I do want to get into another question, Mr. Carruthers, if I might. Yeah. Mr. Carruthers, what concerns do you have about how the Air Commission may work?
We have a lot of concerns about that. We have concerns about who will be appointed. Will they have connections to financial connections, other connections to the healthcare industry, so that they're not objective? We have concerns about VSOs who will be appointed. Will they be representative of the diversity and of the future of the veteran population? VSOs today tend to be, like many of them, like myself, they tend to be white and older. And we're really concerned that younger female veterans and veterans of diverse backgrounds will be represented on the Air Commission. We're concerned that the staff is vetted so that they don't have connections to the healthcare industry in any way it might benefit from privatization. That includes the contractors. And we're concerned about what standards will be used when the Air Commission does that. For example, if they're going to look at utilization of a facility, are they going to look at what possible expansion could be done with that facility? Are they just going to look at what the current utilization is? If I take time for one example, we have a lot of veterans who have what we call bad paper. They got less than an honorable discharge, and sometimes we have people that have served more than one combat tour, and they've had some kind of difficulty with the Army. And really, depending on the commanding officer and the service, they may have gotten an administrative discharge. Those are people that the VA could consider for eligibility. So there are a lot of things that can be done either and say this facility is not utilized. The question is, could it be utilized? And we wonder if the Air Commission will look at those kind of things. So we have other concerns, but those are some of our basic concerns.
Well, thank you, Mr. Carruthers. My time is.
Yeah, you cut yourself off there, Mr. Chairman. I think you did recognize me.
I'm sorry, Mr. Boston.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I called you for 5 minutes.
So thank you, and I appreciate that. Secretary Principi, do you believe that the $18 billion that the White House is requesting is good investment without having the Air Commission's recommendations in hand?
No, I think you created the Air Commission to, do exactly that, to ensure that the VA direct healthcare system is aligned for the future and to look at various options to provide that care directly through the VA. I think there may be an urgent need to utilize some of that money for the issues that were raised during this hearing for maintenance and upkeep that are critically important. But in terms of constructing new medical centers, realigning, I think that the $18 billion would be very prudent to ask the VA and then the Air Commission to opine on how that $18 billion, the bulk of that $18 billion can be used. I think that would be the best course going forward.
Yeah, I have to agree with you on the fact that I believe that more money being spent on maintenance of facilities we know are going to stay around rather than making that investment when we really haven't got the data back that specifically a majority of the people from this committee supported the Air Commission when we created it, and moving forward with it and letting it do its jobs first. But also, can you kind of please tell me, because you know and understand why it worked, why it was there, why the CARES Commission recommendations were not fully implemented?
Well, first, I created the CARES Commission because one evening I was in a major metropolitan area that had 3 VA medical centers within close proximity of one another, all that were built in the 1950 timeline. So at that time, they were about 50, 55 years old. They were all built to over 800 beds. So that night that I was in New York City and I looked up at a bed tower and I saw very few lights on, when I asked my staff how many patients we had in all 3 medical centers, I was told 287, 2,400 beds and 287 patients, facilities that were over 50 years old. And I believe that Mr. Longman's observations are correct, that we need to maintain capacity. But would we be better off in some cities building a modern 21st century medical center to care for veterans and maybe dependents, as Mr. Longman indicated, rather than having 3 medical centers that are 50 or 60, now 70 years old, that have a very, very low utilization. So those are the kinds of issues that I believe would be best left to the VA and the commission that you established and the president establishes to address those issues.
So, you know, the CARES Act was kind of similar to the AIR, but there's a difference. Can you explain what the difference might be, why it is that the AIR's commissions will probably be more likely to have their recommendations implemented?
I apologize for not answering your question, Mr. Ranking Member.
You answered the first part of it.
Well, I was very proud that the Veterans Organization stood behind me when we announced the recommendations of the CARES Commission. What had happened, though, unlike the BRAC Commission, where Congress kind of a vote of disapproval is kind of an up or down vote, the CARES I did not have that authority. So in many instances, there were the recommendations for building new medical centers were approved, and rightfully so. But obviously, there was a lot of hesitation and resistance to maybe closing or realigning other facilities. I think that was the difference between, in my case, chairing the BRAC Commission and leading the effort on the CARES Commission, if that answers your question.
Yeah, and it does, and thank you for the work on that. I am a believer that, we need to wisely handle this. I do believe that these funds should be invested in maintenance and that we should wait on the Air Commission to come back. With that, Mr. Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Boss, Mr. Ranking Member. I now call on Mr. Lamb, Representative Lamb, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Principi, I just wanted to clear up a couple of things before the remainder of the hearing. On the form that you provided us before the hearing, you marked that you were an advisor. I think advisor was the word you used, to both Tri-West and the PHRMA trade group. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And your contention is that neither TriWest nor PHRMA have a financial interest in the subject of today's hearing?
They do. That's why I listed it down on the form.
They do have a interest in the subject of today's hearing.
Yes.
Got it. Okay, that's what I thought and wanted to ask you about, but I must have read your form a little bit differently. Just give me 1 second here to be sure that I know what I'm talking about here. Yeah, sorry. I think I was.
I thought I wrote it down correctly.
Yeah, I thought the way that you wrote it was that you are not representing any company with an interest in the subject matter of this hearing. So is it?
That's correct. I'm not.
You're not representing TriWest or PHRMA?
No, absolutely not.
So you are an advisor to both of those groups, but you don't consider yourself to be representing them here today?
I don't, and I think my testimony about the importance of the VA healthcare system and that it should not be privatized for community care speaks to my passion for the VA healthcare system as a direct patient care provider. I'm pleased to offer advice to TriWest and Pharma on how they can best serve the VA as partners. But I'm not here representing them.
You are not representing them. I understand that. So you would agree with me though that TriWest in particular has a financial interest in how much healthcare gets performed outside of the walls of the VA versus inside of the walls of the VA. Correct?
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely.
And I would say the same thing about PHRMA. I mean, PHRMA, and I don't know if you say it by the letters or not, but the VA pays less in drug prices than almost anyone else in the healthcare system. Am I right about that?
Absolutely.
And so again, the more prescribing activity that takes place outside the walls of the VA versus inside is to PHRMA's benefit.
No, I don't think so, because I think veterans seeking care in the community still get their pharmaceuticals through the VA.
Yeah, I believe that. That is the ideal case. I do think there are emergency and urgent care scenarios in which it's purchased outside of the walls of the VA. But I agree with you, and that is the goal, that it stays within the VA system. Have you also participated in the BRAC process as a member of the private sector?
I was chairman of BRAC, Representative. I chaired the BRAC Commission in 2005.
And have you ever had experience representing various groups in the BRAC process, specifically trying to oppose it?
No, I chaired the BRAC process immediately after I left serving as Secretary of the VA.
Right. Do you think that the BRAC process has helpful lessons for the AIR process coming up? Meaning, is it important that financial interests and private interests are not given an avenue to oppose the recommendations of the AIR process?
Absolutely. I think it's important. I think one of the lessons I would learned is the importance of the president and the Congress, however it's worded, nominating members of the commission who have the expertise, the beneficiaries of the VA. Clearly, that I think is an important aspect for the commission to ensure that its work is done well and in the best interest of the beneficiaries of the VA healthcare system.
Great. Thank you for your testimony today, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. I now call on General Bergman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the panel. Thanks, everybody. I'll get right to my questions here, because A lot of good information passed. Anyone on the panel, whoever cares to respond, how can the VA better tailor its infrastructure plans, and that's long-term infrastructure plans, to address veterans' needs in rural and remote areas? Where is the balance between building and leasing VA facilities in rural and remote areas, versus focusing on continuing to build, out our community care networks, considering all the factors, especially since you factor in the telehealth boom. So again, going back to the previous panel, we got legacy, we got next gen. How do we transition the VA capability to better reflect rural and remote veterans in the 21st century digital world? Anybody want to comment?
I think one of the things you mentioned is, General Berg, one of the things you mentioned was leasing. As brought up in the first panel, the leasing authorities is making it more difficult to provide some of those services. So changing the leasing authority, as Ms. Brownlee mentioned, would help at least expand that option for areas across the country. That's at least maybe the first step. Additionally, broadband. Broadband is something that we always talked about, telehealth in rural communities, but this past year really highlighted the fact that there's a broadband issue across the country. Atlas sites around the country are being propped up in both VFW sites, in Walmarts, in different areas around the country where rural veterans can access their care through telehealth. That's another option. So there are a few things the VA can do to be a little bit diverse than typical brick and mortar solution.
Great. Secretary Principi?
Yes, I think expanding the outpatient clinics, the ambulatory clinics, whether it be through lease or construction, is a very, very important step to ensure that veterans in rural areas get the care they have earned and deserve. You can't build a medical center in every community, but I think making sure that the primary care needs are met, transportation networks are available to get them to a VA medical center in a larger city close by where the rural areas are steps that can be taken to reach veterans in those areas.
Okay, thank you. And as we know for a fact that the younger generations of veterans are going to want their health care delivered, let's say, to the at least 50% level in a different way than us older veterans, because we're used to going into clinics, we're used to going into hospitals, physicians' offices. The younger veterans tend to want to do it on their phone, on their iPad, whatever, and that's okay. In the end, it's about delivery of the health care and then getting them in to see someone physically when they need to. Mr. Murray, in your written testimony, you raised concerns about VA's current staff ability to have, quote, manpower or expertise required to plan or oversee VA's infrastructure, end quote. Can you please provide us some more background on this concern and what needs to change in order to ensure additional funds are not wasted?
Absolutely. Thank you, General. A lot of times when we talk about staffing, we talk about doctors and nurses, the major staffing shortage at VA facilities. And that is a major problem. It's something that needs to be addressed. However, project managers, engineers, people with the oversight and management of these projects is also critical to hire, both at VA national staff for their larger projects and at the individual facilities to manage the NRM. If we try to do an influx of resources to help mitigate some of these backlog lists, if there aren't people there to do the work or oversee the work, then it's going to be a wasted effort. I think building VA's internal capacity is probably the first step in making sure that whether it's the American Jobs Plan or the results of the AIR Act, they need to be able to perform the work, and that starts with hiring people in order to do it.
Okay. Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, can I just add one point to General Bergman's, and that is, I think it's the importance of the VA and DoD partnering in rural areas where there may be a military base is very important. You take Alaska, take Anchorage, for example. You've got a small VA facility. You've got Elmendorf Air Force Base Hospital. I think that kind of jointness can also help reach veterans in rural areas. I apologize for the delay.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I now thank you, Mr. Bergman, for yielding back. Mr. Pappas, I now call Mr. Pappas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be pretty brief. I'll just pick up on what General Bergman was just discussing about access issues for rural veterans in particular. But I'm wondering if maybe we could zero in, Mr. Murray, just a little bit on some of the barriers that veterans face to access care. I think we've all learned about the wonder of telehealth here over the last many months. We know that's a change that is here to stay. We have to nurture that. I was on recently with the FCC, and the number of folks who lack sort of the infrastructure in their area to dial into telehealth is outweighed by the number of folks that just can't afford to have access to the technology and to broadband services to get on to telehealth. So that's also an issue that we have to look at, so that it impacts urban and rural veterans to make sure that they can access this sort of life-changing telehealth services. In addition to that, transportation is a critical issue. I talked to so many veterans in my district that, as we say in New England, just can't get there from here. There's no way to get to a CBOC or to the VA Medical Center in Manchester, where I live. Never mind get to a full service facility in a place like Boston or White River Junction, Vermont. So could you talk a little bit about how the talk about infrastructure is important, but it also intersects with these other issues that deal with the barriers that veterans face to access care?
It is. Thank you, Congressman. And I grew up in Rhode Island, so I recognize that statement very well. But as you mentioned, some of the different barriers, and they do exist. Oftentimes we do say rural veterans, but barriers to care can also be socioeconomic. There's also technology barriers. There's a lot of things. Again, we talked up telehealth as this great resource that everyone's able to pivot to, but it also highlighted the people that have barriers to accessing that care. Again, I think that VA did a good job in pivoting to telehealth last year. That's a tool in the toolbox that we want them to retain. We want them to keep that as a regular part of their healthcare services. Veterans across the country, anyone who can access it can benefit that, whether it's in a rural area, whether it's in a city. But there, again, is socioeconomic issues that could also affect that. So we need to look at trying to help out some of those veterans who distance isn't the only problem that's accessing care. There's also other factors. So we think there's a whole health approach to providing this care for veterans around the country, no matter who they are.
And maybe, Mr. Roy, if I could stay with you for a second, how does the changing picture of veterans in our country, the diversifying veteran population, many more women who are veterans today, and in addition to that, sort of the issues and challenges that our veteran community is facing, how does that need to influence what the physical infrastructure and physical plant looks like for VA?
I think one of the things that will really help is finding out more about our veteran population, not just within the VA population who's using it, but also the majority of veterans who actually aren't. We need to find out what their wants and needs are. We need to find out the services that VA provides and offers and what gaps are there, how to get more veterans into VA. That's the way that we can really start identifying ways of getting ahead of the need, so that it's not a chicken and egg scenario where they want the services but they're not there, or they want to offer the services but no veterans can utilize them. I think looking at the veteran population within VA and outside is an important step that needs to happen, so we can be more educated about the services required of them.
Well, thanks for those comments. I really appreciate them. I thank the entire panel for sharing your thoughts here on this important issue, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. I now recognize Mr. Rosendale for 5 minutes. Mr. Rosendale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. Appreciate everybody coming out and sharing information with us today. Mr. Murray, a lot of focus today has been given to building and maintenance facilities around the country, but the fact of the matter is that we simply cannot afford, the VA cannot afford to have a duplication of efforts in all the medical facilities across the nation. We're not going to be able to do that. And so my question is, do you believe it is better for us to focus on preservation of VA facilities and employment of the people there within, or should we really be focusing on the highest quality of health care where and when our veterans need it, and the delivery of that, which is especially difficult in our rural areas?
Congressman, I don't believe that those two things would be mutually exclusive. I think that we can still continue to offer high quality healthcare, but also planning for what the veterans who are currently using it need, but also making sure that, as you mentioned, we're not being duplicative. But I believe that that's why we need to know more about the VA facilities. The care process is incredibly important. We really need to find out what the market assessments are going to provide in terms of information. This is all information that's going to help craft the future of VA. We still also need to focus on the current needs of VA as well. As mentioned, there's an incredibly high backlog of maintenance that needs to happen right now. Some of these things are long overdue, so we think that they can happen at the same time.
So let me ask you this: when we talk about that skip process for the evaluation, okay, and we were also listening to Mr. Principi talking about 600 empty beds when you've got this great big facility in New York, which is, from what I understand, not a low rent district. Okay, so we're spending an incredible amount of money there. So would it make sense to incorporate a good analysis of again, where the demand is, where our veterans' demand is, to make sure that we can deliver the highest quality healthcare to our veterans when they need it and where they need it?
Agree completely. I think that's what the AIR process is going to help really craft for the future. As Secretary Principi mentioned, in the past, that's how healthcare models were designed: large facilities with expansive medical beds. That may not be the future of the VA footprint. It may be C-box, it may be super C-box, it might be medical facilities. That's why the AIR process is so important. It will help guide the pathway forward.
And to share, when I went to the Fort Harrison Veterans Hospital probably a month and a half ago with Secretary McDonough, we had a lot of other outside medical professionals there that were talking about this collaboration with other medical facilities in the community, so that, again, we were not spending all the additional money on this duplication of efforts.
I do believe there's a healthy balance to be had there. VA has provided excellent care for the patients who utilize it. We've done studies, there have been other folks that have done studies, that over 90% of veterans who utilize VA, like VA, appreciate the services and would recommend it to their fellow veterans. We want to retain VA as the primary provider for healthcare for veterans. We think that they've shown, especially over the past year with the pandemic, there's one healthcare network that didn't break. The public health network is so fixated because they're profit driven on being right sized. They had no surge capacity. VA took the body blow of the pandemic and withstood it. I think that that's the kind of system that we need to continue to invest in to make sure that that kind of services are always available for veterans today and in the future.
So my last question would be, in speaking with, and I'm not sure if Mr. Longman or Mr. Murray or Mr. Principi, who's going to be best for this, but in speaking with the contractors over the last month and a half, commercial, residential contractors, we've seen an increase of construction costs of anywhere from 500 to 700%, and also dramatic interruptions in the supply chain for their materials. And one would certainly think that this is going to be a temporary situation. So what would be the priorities of what we want to be working on construction now, as opposed to things that we could push off until this seems to get by us?
I mean, frankly, lumber costs is one prime example that have gone up tenfold. The supply chain issues are a real thing affecting America. I don't believe that we should be putting off too much, especially because there are some examples where this maintenance might be necessary, might be life safety related issues. Those should never be pushed off and prioritized, specifically seismic related issues, especially in California where the bulk of the seismic corrections are needed. That's stuff that needs to be prioritized at all times. I do understand the issue that hopefully we start to see those prices subside, but for now, I think that I don't have a great answer. I wish we could say when it will, but there are things that cannot be pushed off.
Mr. Chair, I would yield back. I see that we're over time now. Thank you so much for all the information.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. They were good questions. I now want to call upon Mr. Mervan for 5 minutes. Mr. Mervan, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Principi, in your experience, which VA services most lend themselves to online access and which do not translate well?
Sir, are you referring to telemedicine?
Well, what I'm referring to is anything that is online or anything that is the services available, which translate specifically well to the online platform and which do not, as far as having success rates?
Well, I'm not sure I can answer the question accurately. I would think that behavioral health would lend itself to online, where veterans who are experiencing, mental health issues can speak with a provider or allied healthcare professional. I think, the movement towards home health care, so the linkage between a provider or a nurse at a VA medical center and a veteran who is receiving care at the home might be a good online way to provide that care. So I think there are going to be more and more opportunities in the years ahead, but I would think behavioral health would be one of the areas that online telemedicine could be very, very helpful, again, especially for veterans in rural areas where they may not have access, and there may not be very many providers in the rural areas that could provide that type of care. So having that connectivity, I think, would be very beneficial.
And then secondarily, is spending time and effort bridging the divide worthwhile, or should the VA redouble its analog approach to certain benefits?
I'm not sure I'm competent enough to answer that question, but I certainly think that they should continue to explore opportunities in the digital world and the analog world to provide care to veterans in need who cannot access that care otherwise. So I think, the advent of artificial intelligence and all the things that can be done digitally are a great avenue to provide care where you can't do it in person.
And this question is for the IB VSOs. What do you feel is the single most impactful use of technology that VA could adopt to improve access for veterans?
Mr. Mervan, one of the things we mentioned was Atlas. It does open up an alternate path for services in different communities across the country, but also investing in hardware so that VA can operate their telehealth appropriately, making sure that they have the proper IT hardware, the cooling systems, the power, the trunk lines into the buildings to make sure that their data is capable of pushing that out, making sure that their infrastructure is set up in order to provide that IT telehealth care.
So just a follow-up to that, in your assessment, the IT infrastructure isn't up to speed to be able to manage that task currently?
In some places, it was specifically highlighted with EHRM needs, as mentioned earlier, that it was maybe underestimated what the needs were going to be. There are ways, we saw this in the processing out in VBA, their inability to process an influx of claims due to not having enough capacity with their internet. Things like that are small steps that will help go a long way in preventing hurdles and roadblocks in the future.
Thank you very much. At this time, Chairman Takano, I'd like to yield back my time.
Thank you, Chair Mervan. And now I'll call on Representative Trone for 5 minutes. Representative?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses very much. Mr. Murray, I want to continue on the topic that you've been talking to Representative Bergman and Pappas about, and that's our rural veterans. You described the importance of broadband to our rural vets, and I've talked to countless vets in my district, very rural areas, and heard same responses. Just like you to speak briefly on the importance of the flexibility for our VA providers to use telehealth, but that broadband is often a big issue. The Biden administration has laid out a plan for $100 billion investment into broadband. What would this nationwide expansion of broadband mean for the VA and your ability to reach vets in the rural areas?
Thank you, Congressman. It would greatly improve access to veterans across the country. It was something that whenever we discuss the lack of broadband, far too many of us don't recognize that is a real issue that affects a lot more people than we ever realized. And again, it's rural. That's one place that we can point to that's easily identifiable, but it's also low-income veterans, elderly veterans. There's technology barriers. There's a lot of different issues. Rural is an easy fix. We can all identify how to fix that problem. Go lay the actual lines out there, send the cat cables out there. That's a simple fix to imagine. But things like that would really help expand care for telehealth for VA services.
Yeah, there's no question. It sounds like from your testimony, we need to go big. We need to get it done and get it done right, and not let our rural areas and those inner cities fall behind. Last September, I had a roundtable discussion on broadband in Cumberland, Maryland, with Representative Morris Rogers. And she and I, the question that hit us was over and over, what would broadband expansion mean for our community? And the veterans in Cumberland all were crystal clear. Access to telehealth, telemental health, and throughout the VA community, and was so crucial to their infrastructure. I'd like to talk about briefly the importance of medical research infrastructure. Every dollar we invest in medical research today will help a vet in the future. Fort Detrick in my district runs a combat casualty care research program, and their innovations will help fill tomorrow's gaps in combat casualty care for our service members and vets. So, Secretary Principe, how important it is for Congress and the VA to continue investing in medical research, and how do these investments in medical research help our veterans?
Sir, medical research to VA is critically important. I would put it up there that one of the highest priorities is to make sure the VA has a robust VA research program, given the unique needs of the veteran population. Absolutely critically important to invest in the future, to invest in research. VA has been a pioneer in medical research. We talked about telemedicine. The VA is the pioneer in telemedicine. Really, they're the innovators. They're the revolutionary point men in so many medical research. Could not agree more that the investment needs to be made.
Well, we appreciate that very much. I mean, just a year ago, we were battling the previous administration to keep open the Uniformed Services University open. They wanted to close that school that trains our military doctors. That's unthinkable. So we've got to continue as a team fighting for investments that serve our veterans. They certainly deserve, no less. So thank you for your testimony, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Trone. I don't see any further members who wish to question. I would like to thank the second panel for appearing today. And if there are, I will now ask all members to, I'll recognize Member Bost if he has any closing remarks that he would like to make before I make my own.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. You know, I'm glad we were given the opportunity to ask the VA through tough questions about the infrastructure. I just recently was in the St. Louis facility, understand the importance of what we're trying to do, but unfortunately, I still have a lot more questions than we have answers right now. You know, none of us have enough information to say how the White House is proposing $18 billion would be spent or why it's needed. We do know we don't know which projects it would fund. We also do not have solutions to be a serious problem with construction and management. This is a lack of information is exactly what happened with the American Rescue Plan. We must stop ignoring our constitutional duty to provide proper oversight to ensure the administration is doing the right thing. In a short time, we will have a bipartisan commission providing us with recommendations on how to reform VA's medical infrastructure. We must let the commissioners do their work. To do otherwise is putting the cart before the horse and undermining the bipartisan will of Congress and the veteran service organizations who created the AIR Act in the first place. I will always support making sensible investments to help our veterans. However, the administration owes us much more information before we could even begin to say whether or not this proposal makes sense. It is my experience that we will be, it is my expectation that we will be given the information we need and have enough time to review it before marking up this proposal. I thank our witnesses and especially the former secretary for being here as well and for sharing their views with us today. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I thought there were very good questions coming from members from both sides of the aisle today. I think we're all concerned about VA's capacity to manage large-scale construction projects, and there will be strong oversight from this committee regarding the VA's ability to staff up internally, about its ability to engage the expertise that it needs to engage in order to avoid the mistakes of the past. And I will insist that VA revisit and learn from those mistakes. Beyond that, I also wanted to say that I think it's rather sensible from what we heard from VA today that the American Jobs Plan, American Families Plan, and the $18 billion for upgrading and improving our infrastructure within the VA can happen in parallel with the AIR Commission. That seems to be at least a practical way forward. I have my own concerns about whether the scope of the AIR Commission needs to be modified and enlarged in light of what we have experienced through this pandemic. As the spokesman for the independent budget remarked, the VA had surge capacity. The VA took that hit of the surge capacity. That surge capacity was not available in the private sector medical world because they have a just-in-time profit-making orientation. And there was no surge capacity in the private sector. And we obviously need to be pandemic resilient in the future. And so as the AIR Commission does its work, I believe it's going to need to look at the broader implications of our most recent pandemic experience. But moving forward, I think VA can identify and has identified and does have at its fingertips what priorities, what facilities do need to be prioritized. And as Mr. Murray noted, there are facilities that need to be upgraded, and what's at stake are lives, that we cannot continue to allow certain facilities in our country to not be upgraded and improved. So with that, I will say that all members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material. And I want to thank all the witnesses for appearing before us today. And this hearing is now adjourned.